Some time ago, as my alarm went off and I got up to get ready for a Sunday morning like today, my wife had left me a note in the bathroom, and I'll leave that out. And it was on, just this little guy right here, and it says, "I love you. It's worth it." And I have carried that with me since then, just as a reminder in all of the struggles, the difficulties, the good days and the bad days, that what we do is worth it. Since I was a small kid, I have always felt the pull to God. Before my parents ever came to Christ, when I was really little, maybe kindergarten age, we lived outside of Dallas, Texas, and I was a bus kid. And if you're unfamiliar with that, there was a time where churches had buses, and they would go to different areas, and they would just pick up all the kids that wanted to come, and they would take them to church. Doesn't happen a lot today, liability issues, but that's what we did. We just got on a stranger's car and went to church. And there was a bunch of us, though. So anyway, so that's what we did. And some of my earliest memories are bits and pieces of sitting in rooms and playing games and hearing about Jesus long before my parents ever told me about him. And we moved to Missouri and attended a big Baptist church. And I can remember at the age of 9, my dad and I can remember that feeling, the heart pounding. My dad and I, at the end of a service, we walked down an aisle together and knelt at an old school altar. That's the way church used to do it. And we prayed. We asked for forgiveness. And then the next week, we were baptized together. And so the church that we started attending, the church that I ended up growing up in, was a church plant, much like Shift. And we met in a home. The children's stuff was downstairs in the living room, and the adults met in the garage. They converted the garage into a large meeting space, and so that's where we met. And we met there until the church grew too big for that space, and then we built a building. And it was in that building that I learned about a God who loved me, even, despite the fact that I was worthless. Week in and week out, I was told that I was a wretched human being on the precipice of eternal damnation, and that at any given moment, the earth could swallow me up in judgment. That's how it felt. And after that experience, I walked away. I walked away from the church. I mean, I grew up in church. I mean, I saw my parents, they're medical missionaries. I saw miracles with my eyes. I saw people healed of afflictions that can't be explained, and I still walked away. So during that time period, I just did whatever I wanted to do. And it wasn't long before God was just like, "Okay, that's enough, Joe. That's enough. We're going to pull you back in and do what we're going to do." And so what I did was I went to a Bible college. I was thinking, okay, I'm at a Bible college. Now I'm really going to hear about who God really is, and I'm going to figure this thing out. And the unfortunate reality is that the God that I had waiting for me was no better than the God that I left. The school that I went to taught me a very, very narrow view of who God is. Miracles ceased. There were no such thing as miracles today. Women could not lead. You could babysit. It was us versus them. And as an 18-year-old kid trying to figure out life and faith and God, I trusted them, right? They're the experts. And it was all well and good until I went from the us category to the them category. I won't go into any great detail or anything, but I got into some trouble. Nothing crazy, just normal 18-year-old kid trouble. And some of it was due to my immaturity at the time. I mean, what can I say? I was an 18-year-old butthead. I'm a 42-year-old butthead now. It's just I had less of a filter, so it's just me with not as much maturity. And I got into some trouble. The problem wasn't that I paid consequences for the trouble, because if you're going to break the rules, you're going to get in trouble, but it was how I was treated. It was how I was isolated and labeled. And I allowed bitterness to creep into my heart. And so I spent the rest of my time there. It was not good. It wasn't fun at all. And after college, I left. I left. That was it. I was done. Like, if this is what God's people look like, I don't want nothing to do with it, because if that's how they act, then how good could he be? And I did. Every now and then somebody would drag me to church, but I just sat there, like, just hard-hearted, right? God used my then girlfriend at the time, who's my wife. Her voice was the one that God used to speak to my stone-cold heart. Her voice was the one that I could hear through all of the other stuff, and he did use her voice to speak to me. We left. I stayed in our college town after school, and my wife, she transferred back up to where she's from in Columbia. It was about 4 hours apart. We spent a good couple of years about 4 hours apart before cell phones, people. So I knew it was real. Lots of calling cards, if you remember those, payphones on calling cards and stuff. Yeah, a lot of trips. Anyway, so we moved up there to get ready for the wedding, and when I got away from the whole situation and with her, we started volunteering at her old church and her old youth group. And then we started kind of getting more and more plugged in, and eventually, after the wedding and some time together, we were just working regular jobs, and we felt the pull. Okay, let's look at this ministry. Let's do this. And so we took a family ministry position at a struggling church up in northern Missouri. Now, full disclosure, this church is awesome now. They are just killing it. They are making this massive impact in this small town that they're in. This small town is radically different, changed, because these people love Jesus, and they are the hands and feet of Jesus, and they are out there doing some awesome things. Super proud to be part of their story, super proud of what they're doing. We're friends with their staff, and a lot of people from that church are on our support team. So we've maintained great friendships. But at that time, this church was not like that. At the time that we got there, the church was known for chewing up and spitting out their pastors. And they just would grind us. And the 5 long years that we were there was really good with our students. Our students were awesome. The youth group was amazing, but the church was terrible. And I would never do it again. So when the call from another church outside St. Louis was like, hey, we want you to come do this for us, we were like, yes. So we jumped over there, and everything was great. At first, it was the town that I grew up in. We were closer to her parents. We were right next door to mine. Not literally, just in the same town. And we're not dumb. And I'm kidding. My mom's going to listen to this. I'm totally kidding, Mom. We would so live next door. We really would live next door. My parents are awesome. We'd have boundaries. But but at first it was great. It was awesome. And the church experienced a lot of growth. We went from like 150, 175 to when we left, it was like 700, 800. And a lot of people's lives changed. And there was a lot of good stuff that happened. But it's like year 2, I think, year 2 into year 3, we got this eldership that then changed everything. They began to move the church into a very business-like direction where it was results-oriented and statistics and all of these metrics. And I don't have a problem with measuring things. If you don't set goals, you have no idea how you know what I mean? Like, you've got to have something. You want to strive for excellence. But when people are straight numbers, and that's all they are, then it's a sin, and that's where we were going. And behind the scenes, I fought tooth and nail, man. I did. And it caused a lot of friction. It caused a lot of hardships within the staff and the leadership. And but I wasn't going to answer for those things. I was not going to stand before God and answer for this. So I fought, and I spoke out, and I argued. But I'm just the youth minister, so what does he know? That's how it was. And then my wife, unfortunately, I'm ashamed to admit this, she suffered silently for years because it was God first, church very close second, and then family was in there somewhere. And we were called to be about the business of the church more than anything else. And so God began to stir that in my heart, and we ended up quitting. We ended up just leaving. We didn't have another church or anything. We worked regular jobs, and it was awesome. It was like a paid vacation every stinking day I went to work. Because I went to work, I got to make my own schedule, which was awesome. I worked for myself, and I won't go into all of it, but it was just me. And I clocked in and clocked out, and then that was it. And it was amazing. It was awesome. I'm like, is this how the rest of the world lives? Because this is great. And we did that. We did that for almost a year. And it was awesome. And obviously, we didn't stay there because I'm standing here now, but we began to fill the pool back into full-time ministry. And so what happened was that we ended up moving to Gainesville to lead a church that was a small church that was struggling. It wanted to turn it around. They talked about wanting to reach the city and wanting to make a difference. And that's what we wanted to be a part of. We were tired of playing church. We wanted to be a part of something that was real and like lives changed, and we would impact the community. And so that's what we did. And we got close, man. We did. We got real close. We thought we were going to turn a corner, and then things just rapidly started falling apart. When the rubber hit the road and they had to make some decisions to change, they weren't willing to do so. It actually led us into the worst year of ministry, and it was soul-crushing, heartbreaking, anxiety, anger, resentment, depression. It was terrible. Like I said, it was the worst year of ministry we've ever experienced. And this is where our story starts to take a bit of a turn. But do you see a pattern taking place? Like, my goal here this morning is not to paint the local church in a bad light or not to have us feel these negative emotions towards the church, because in every place that we were at, it was a bunch of broken people coming together, trying to follow Jesus as best they could. Sure, there were a few of them that had ulterior motives. There were a few of them that I could pinpoint that were like, nope, they're after power. They're playing games, right? But most of them, almost all of them, were good people, broken people, trying to figure out how to do this together. They were just doing it wrong. And people were suffering in the middle of that. So our story starts to take a little bit of a twist here, because it was an unexpected turn. 5 years ago, I met Brad Zacharitz. And we met because we heard through the grapevine that there was this other church that was getting ready to plant in Gainesville that was the same kind of church that I was leading. We were the same association, non-denominational Christian church. And so we got word of that, and I was just like, what? I just got here. Like, I've been here 1 stinking year, and now this other church is going to show up in the backyard, and now we're going to have to compete and blah, blah, blah. It wasn't a very good attitude to have, I admit it, but it was the attitude I had at the time, okay? So you can ask my wife. I was mad, doggone it. So mad. I told you. So I was like, I set up an appointment with Mr. Brad Zacharitz, because I'm going to meet this punk, and I'm going to give him what for. And you can tell, was that not my attitude? The morning that I was going, I'm like, I'm going to give it to him. I'm going to tell him no. So we met at the Flying Biscuit, because that's where you have showdowns in this city. So we met at the Flying Biscuit. We sat outside and had breakfast food. Because if there's any food that's angry food, it's breakfast food, right? No, that's God's food. Okay, bacon and eggs. Anyway, I digress. So we started having this conversation, and we hit it off. And we began this friendship. And I even helped his family move into their first home. We had Brad and his family over to our church and gave them the stage. We ended up wanting to support Shift in whatever they were doing. And so we began to bridge this gap that often happens between churches, right? There is no competition. We're on the same team. So let's work together. And so we started to form that friendship. We even We even gave Shift, before I was Shift, I gave them office space in our building. We had a couple of classrooms that were being unused at the time, and so we said, hey, do you guys want this so you can have office space? And Shift was in our building for almost 2 years. And during that time period, we even tried to lead twice. We tried to lead a merger between the two churches. And a merger between churches basically is one church is declining, right? And it's a dying church, and the other is growing, but they need resources. We had resources, but we didn't have the growth or vision or strategy. And you combine the two, and the declining adopts the DNA of the growing, and you move forward together. And we tried that twice, and both times it was yes until it was a no, and it was so heartbreaking. So heartbreaking. But during that time, we got to work together. We got to work next to each other, and I really began to see what Brad was about, and I really began to see the heart of Shift and what Shift was about. And when the church that we were at became unsustainable, it was no longer able to function like a normal church and could not afford anything, we knew what our next step was going to be, and that was going to be to throw in with Shift. And we began to realize that maybe God's call in our life wasn't to just this one particular place, but it was to the city, that we were called to Gainesville and called to this new movement of people that called itself Shift Church. So the question is, why? Right? Why? Because there's one thing that my wife and I have said to each other over and over and over in the last year that we've been on staff is it's worth it. So why is it worth it? Right? Why is Shift worth it? You know, we're not the only church in the city that's doing what we're doing, but we are one of them. So what makes us different? Why is it worth it? Why are we the church for the rest of us? Why wouldn't we go back to the Midwest where all of our friends and family are? Why wouldn't we get a job at an established church? I have lots of answers for that, but what I've done this morning is just narrowed them down to 3, and I want to share those with you this morning. The first reason that Shift is worth it is that my family is worth it. And it may not sound very churchy at first, but I assure you that it is. And that if that's not a priority in the church, then there's something deeply wrong with it. I mean, how can I preach and teach on loving my family and helping to lead family well if I'm never with them? How can I speak to those things? How can a church make family a priority and then schedule against it? How can I co-shepherd my children if I'm not allowed to be around them because I'm out doing churchy things? Listen to what, hold on. Before I go to what Paul says, at one church that I served at, I was out in the evenings 3 to 4 nights every week, and this is where they decided that they were going to try to fire me. They didn't come out and fire me. What they did was instead they offered me a position when I tried to transition out of student ministry into adult ministry. They offered me a position where I would work office hours, and then at night, for 20 hours a week, I'd be out visiting families. So for 4 hours every night, I was expected to be out. When was I going to see my family? When was I going to see my kids? That was when I quit. Because one of the elders, the head elder, came to me and said, we want to have to come to you as staff and tell you to go home because you're working too much. Now, of course, there are seasons, where things happen and you've got to sprint, but ministry is not a sprint, man. It's a marathon. Well, listen to what Paul says. Paul, one of the early church leaders, wrote in his letter to the church in Ephesus called Ephesians. This is what he says in chapter 5, verse 25. For husbands, this means love your wives, just as Christ loved the church. He gave up his life for her to make her holy and clean, washed by the cleansing of God's word. How can I do that if I'm not with her? How can I love her like that? How can I sacrifice? How can I teach my kids what it means to be a husband if they never see me? And it wasn't just me. The expectation wasn't on just me. It was on our leaders and our volunteers as well. And if you as a family were part of this church and you didn't come to everything we did, then there's something wrong with your spiritual walk. We chewed through families, leaders, and volunteers like you wouldn't believe. I know families today, almost 10 years later, that still have not stepped foot back into a church because they were so hurt by what happened. My kids. In the Old Testament, which is the collection of stories about God's people before Jesus, we see Moses, who was the man that God raised up to lead his people out of slavery, 400 years of slavery from Egypt. And he's gathered people together and he's giving them like, okay, this is how we do this together as a community. And he's talking about passing down faith from one generation to the next. And he says this in chapter 11, verse 19, teach them to your children. He's talking about God's commandments. Teach them to your children. Talk about them when you're at home and when you're on the road, when you're going to bed and when you're getting up. And so he's looking at just this natural rhythm of the day, using that to teach our kids about who God is. But how can I take advantage of that if they never see me? A church, I mentioned it before, a church cannot preach on the importance and teach on the importance of family and then schedule against their families. It's not possible. And then came Shift. This week alone, this point has been driven home to us. Oftentimes, I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to teach or lead a small group, or you're going to be talking to somebody about something, but the enemy just really attacks you on that thing. And so this week, nothing huge happened, just lots of little things. And it was a long week, man. It was just one of those weeks, and we felt that spiritual attack. And there were moments where it was like, I got to preach on is it worth it, or it's worth it. And the question was, is it? Is it worth it? And I was like, I got to preach on this. I'm writing this sermon. But anyway, I was almost ordered to stop. To just stop. Joe, take the afternoon. And I can't tell you how many times Brad or Abby called me this week because they could sense it, that something was off. I'm like, are you doing okay? We're just calling to check on you. Are you okay? Abby called me the other day, and she's like, Joe, you got to take the afternoon off. She's like, you doing all right? She's like, go play video games or go watch SpongeBob or whatever it is you do. And I'm like, what am I, 12? But I did. I played video games, and I watched SpongeBob. And it was awesome. And Tori looked at me after I got off the phone with her. She looked at me and she's like, that's crazy. She's like, do you realize that after almost 20 years of being in full-time ministry, that's the first time that's ever happened? Shift is worth it because my family's worth it. The second answer I have to is why it's worth it is you're worth it. If you've been here for any amount of time, you've heard the phrase church for the rest of us. Why are we saying that? And when I first heard that, it kind of rubbed me the wrong way because it's like, well, why would you separate yourself? What are you too cool for school here? Like, what, you got the cool new name and the cool logo and the cool T-shirts and yes, those are true, but that's not what that means. That's not what that means at all. Some of us here this morning have similar experiences to mine. Some have worse. Some have different. But we carry baggage around. Right? Some of us carry different baggage, but our common thread is we all carry some baggage. We have this baggage with us that's just full of crap. So much junk. What happens to those of us who know we have to deal with all this junk that we carry around, all this crap that we have to deal with? But every place that we go tells us you can't talk about these things. You have to look this way. You have to act this way. You have to talk this way. Well, what happens to those of us that have all this junk that can't talk this way, that can't act this way, that can't look this way, that we can't pretend anymore? What happens to the rest of us? In one of the biographies of Jesus, titled John, we see what he has to say about us. John chapter 8, it's a pretty well-known story. The religious leaders of the day, the Pharisees, they trap this woman. It's a setup from the get-go, and they catch her in the act of love with a guy, and they drag her out. Now, everybody knows what the penalty is, okay? It's a different time period. Women, number one, women were basically property. Number two, adultery. The penalty for that was death. So she knew right away, I'm dead. I'm dead. And it's not like lethal injection or anything. They're going to stone me. They're going to hurl large stones at me till I'm dead. So she's terrified, absolutely terrified. And she's thrown in front of Jesus. They don't care about her at all, right? And Jesus is like, what's going on? And they think they're so smart. They just think they're so smart. And they're like, hey, Jesus, what do we do with her? Because now, if he says, well, you got to follow the law, then he's going to be the one responsible for killing this woman. But if he says no, then he's breaking the law. They think they're just, you know what I mean? Religious people, we got you now, you know? And so Jesus just gets down in the dirt and starts scribbling. I don't know what he's drawing. I mentioned it before. It'd be like if you got called into the principal's office and you pulled out your phone and started texting. It's kind of the same disrespect. And he just starts drawing in the dirt. And they're bugging him and bugging him and bugging him. What do you say, Jesus? And finally, he's just like, all right, let's do this. And he says this in John 8:7. All right, but let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone. That's awesome. Because they all look at each other like, okay. And they, one by one, drop their stones and walk away. Drop their stones and walk away. And then they leave, and Jesus looks at this woman who clearly has some junk that she's got to deal with in her life. And he says, where are your accusers? Didn't even one of them condemn you? And she says, no, Lord. And Jesus said, neither do I. Go and sin no more. He didn't shame her. He didn't condemn her. He didn't mock her. He loved her. He showed up right in the midst of all of her crap and said, I love you. You don't have to live like this anymore. We need a place like that. Listen, you need to be told that you're worthy. Jesus deemed you worthy of his love. He died on the cross for you. You need to know that. You need to have a place where you can come, and it's okay to not be okay. But it's not okay to stay that way. You need to come to a place where people who are all dealing with our crap, because we all have it, and we're going to deal with it together. And it's okay to not look like you're happy when you come in on a Sunday. And it's okay to have a bad day through the week and reach out to brothers and sisters that are going to pray for you. They're going to make a meal for you. We have to have a community like that because that's the church. This other stuff that's happening is not. And we're tired of playing church. You're worth it. Shift is worth it because you're worth it. The last answer that I have for you this morning is they're worth it. In the biography of Jesus, titled Luke chapter 15, we see Jesus telling 3 stories. They're all about lost things. A lost sheep, a lost coin, and he talks about how they're being frantically looked for, and when they're found, the person that finds them invites everybody and throws out, just this huge celebration. And then this is what Jesus says in verse 7. In the same way, the finding of and celebrating, in the same way, there is more joy in heaven over one lost sinner who repents and returns to God than over the 99 others who are righteous and haven't strayed. That's a hard truth if you're a follower of Jesus, that there's more joy in the finding of one than the 99 that stayed. And yet we get that so mixed up. Most churches are for the 99. We got to be different. Got to be different. Jesus goes on to tell a story of a lost son who squandered an inheritance. He insulted his dad, said, basically, I wish that you were dead. Give me all of my inheritance. And he took it and he ran and he squandered all the money, just threw it away on wild living. And he ends up just homeless and destitute. And this young Jewish man takes a job slopping pigs, which if you know anything about Jewish culture would have been a huge no-no. And he's at this point where he's so hungry that he sees this slop that he's given to pigs and he wishes that he could eat it. And then he finally comes to his senses and says, you know what? I'll go back to my dad and I'll beg for a job. My dad's servants live better than this and I can work. There's no way he's going to forgive me as a son, but I'll do that. And so that's what he does. He sets off to go find his dad to beg for a job. But little does he know what his dad has in mind. So this is where Luke chapter 15, starting in verse 20. So he returned home to his father. And while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. His dad was waiting for him. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. And his son said to him, Father, I've sinned against both heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. And his dad doesn't even respond to him. I love this. But his father said to the servants, quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet. And just so everybody is aware of the symbolism here, this is the father returning the sonship to his son. And kill the calf that we've been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast, for this son of mine was dead and has now returned to life. He was lost, but now he's found. So the party began. Shift is worth it because they're worth it. Our family members, our friends, our neighbors, our coworkers, our classmates, our teachers, and our professors, they need to know that they're worth it. They need to know that Jesus died for them, that Jesus showed up to show them a better way too. They're worth it. That's why we're here. That's why we stay. So what's next? What's the takeaway? What's the next step? What's the thing that you can do with all of that? Well, the reality is for us to do this, for us to be here, to be the church for the rest of us, we need you. We need you. We don't need you to fill slots. We need you to fill parts of ministry. We need you to check in, and we need you to hand out updates, and we need you to help with the band and set up and tear down and lead and treehouse and invite and all of those, organize. We need all of those things. We need you to go home and not leave what we're talking about here, but go do something with it. The reality is that there are all kinds of Joes and Tories and Kelseys and Michaelas that can only be reached by other Joes and Tories and Kelseys and Michaelas. I can only reach who I'm around. I can't reach your people, and you can't reach my people. So we have to do this together. And the reality is that some people are carrying a lot of weight and others haven't stepped up yet. So I'm challenging you, Shift, for those that are on the sidelines, to jump in, man. To jump in. What is it that God has gifted you? How has God gifted you? What are your talents? What are the things that you're passionate about? Maybe it's something we haven't even mentioned yet. So let's dream together, man. Let's figure that out. So, the update. There's a tear-off portion. If you haven't tore that off, tear it off. Turn it in back there in that box, or give it to one of the Start Here people. Come talk to one of us about next steps, or talk to the Start Here people about next steps. Stick around for Growth Track and Step 2, and get some answers about who we are as a church and what that means for you. Just don't walk away in the exact same place that you are right now. I'm going to tell you the same thing that my wife and I say to each other all the time. It's worth it. It's worth it because our families are worth it. It's worth it because you're worth it. And it's worth it because they're worth it. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for what you've done for us on our behalf, that you have deemed us worthy of your love, that you have deemed us worthy of your kingdom and all that comes with adoption into that upside-down kingdom. And so, Lord, I pray that you would use us, not to just grow a stinking church, Lord, but, Lord, use us to benefit your church in this city. Use us to grow your kingdom. God, I pray that you would stir something deep in our souls, that we're meant for more. God, give us the next steps for what that means. It's going to be different for all of us, but man, if we're all thrown in together, if we're all part of the body, I just can't imagine what you're going to do with that. So Lord, in those areas that nobody else will, send us. Send us, not so that Shift becomes big or any of those things that we get so concerned about, but send us because, man, people need to hear you. People need to see your love. They need to feel your love. So God, help us to be the ones that are hugging. Help us to be the ones that are serving. God, I pray that whether we're followers of Jesus or not, that this morning that we start taking steps towards you. And I pray that anybody that's here, Lord, that may not know who you are, God, I ask that they heard about your love and your grace and your forgiveness and your great, great mercy in our lives. Now, Jesus, as we leave this place, we pray that everything that we did and said was for your glory and your glory alone. And God, I pray that we wouldn't leave it here, Lord. We would take it home. And Lord, I can't wait. I can't wait to see what you do through our people this upcoming week. Jesus, we love you. And we ask all of these things in your name. Amen.